Sjón. მოგესალმებით. ესე იგი ძალიან დიდი სიამოვნებით წარმოგიდგენთ Sjons ისლანდიელ წერალს და არა მარტო წერალს, პროზის წერალს, პოეტს, სცენარისტს, სიმღერების ტექსტების ავტორს, ძალიან მრავალი ნიჭის ადამიანს და მის არაჩვეულებრივ წიგნს უგა ბალდურს, რომელიც მე პირველად წავიკითხე რამდენიმე წლის წინ და ეხა ამ შეხვედრისთვის დავუბრუნდი, უკვე ქართულად წავიკითხე და მიუხედავად იმისა, რომ წიგნი მოცულობით დიდი არ არის, უამრავი ახალი რაღაცა აღმოვაჩინე ჩემთვის რა. ისე მოხდა, რომ მე და Sjón ინდოეთში შევხვდით ერთმანეთს, წარმოვადგენდით იქ ფესტივალზე და სხვა შეხვედრებზე. ესეთ გვერქვა თავიდან ვიყავით წარმომადგენლები იმ ქვეყნების პატარა ენების წარმომადგენლები, მაგრამ Sjón-მა მაშინ შეიტანა კორექტურა ეგეთი და დაგვარქვა ენები, რომელზეც ცოტანი ლაპარაკობენ რა, იმიტომ რომ არსებობს დიდი და პატარა ენა და ჩვენი წარსულთან ერთ რაღაცას ვიტყვი, ისე მოხდა, რომ დელიში რომ ჩავედით და 7 ვიყავით და ბევრი ჩვენგანი პირველად იყო ინდოეთში, აი ამ ქვეყანაში რომელზეც ამდენი ის ჰქონდა, პირველი ვიზიტი ჰქონდა ისლანდიის საელჩოში, სადაც Sjón-ის საპატიოდ მიღება იყო გამართული და მე ამას უყვებოდი, რომ ინდოეთში პირველად ისლანდიის საელჩოში მოვხვდით ხო. ეხლა რაც შეეხება ამ წიგნს, რომელსაც ძალიან ბევრი შრე აქვს, როგორც დიდი ლიტერატურის წესია და ჩემ იწყება არაჩვეულებრივად და მთელი წიგნი არაჩვეულებრივად იწყება ნადირობის სცენით და ეს არის ისლანდიური პეიზაჟი, თოვლით დაფარული, ზამთარი და ცხოველი და ადამიანი, რაღაცნაირი დაპირისპირება ცხოველის და ადამიანის, კაცი და მელა, ესე ქვია, ჯერ სახელები არ ვიცით ვინ არიან და თითქოს ამ წიგნში ბევრი წიგნია და ერთი პირველი წიგნი არის ეს ნადირობის სცენა, რომელიც რაღაცა მაშინ უთხარი კიდევაც მე მონადირის დაწერილი იყო, ხო ამაზე შეიძლება ვკითხო, შეიძლება არა, მაგრამ თავდება ეს პირველი თავი გასროლით, არის ერთადერთი გასროლა და მე იწყება მეორე წიგნი, სადაც ვიგებთ ვინ არიან ეს ადამიანები, ეს მოქმედი პერსონაჟები და ერთ-ერთი არის პასტორი, იქ პატარა ისეთი დეტალია, რომელსაც თავის დროზე შეიძლება ყურადღება არ მივაქციე, მაგრამ ეხ მეორე წაკითხვაზე ძალიან დამამახსოვრდა, რომ სანამ გავიგებთ, რომ ეს სასულიერო პირია, ჩანთაში ყოფს ხელს და ფსალმუნიდან ამოხევს ფურცელს და თოფის ლულას იმითი დაუცობს რა. და შემდეგ უკვე შემოდის მასთან დაპირისპირებაში მყოფი მეცნიერი, მებალახე და ეს რაღაცეთ ამ ორი ადამიანის დაპირისპირებაზე, თუმცა ღია კონფრონტაციაში არ შედიან და ჩემი შეკითხვა ის იქნება, რომ მე მეჩვენება, რომ ეს რაღაცა არქეტიპული სახეებია. პასტორი, მეცნიერი, ესე იგი ადამიანი, რომელიც წესით მეთის სახით ლაპარაკობს, მეცნიერი და მელაც კი არქეტიპია და აი ამ არქეტიპებზე თუ შეიძლება რომ ცოტა ვილაპარაკოთ.
Well, thank you. It's so nice to meet you again here after our meeting in India. If I remember correctly, when we said farewell, I was going back to Iceland, but you were going into the mountains to meet the tigers. Yeah, I saw that. So I'm very happy that you got back from the tigers. Yes, you have described the book, I think, quite well, the basics of it. And there are 4 main characters in this book.
I will go to the girl also.
Yes, and right at the beginning, it's only the priest and the fox that the priest is hunting. And then, as you said, in the next chapter, we get introduced to the scientist or the naturalist. He's like a naturalist. And what I liked to do in this book when I was writing it, it's 22 years since I finished writing the book. So I'm sure you remember some of the things in it better than I do. but obviously one of the things that I wanted to work with was the archetypes of religion and science, you can say, and then this free, wild element that is nature, and that is the fox, obviously. And the fox is, in this case, putting religion to the test. The fox is putting the priest to the test. But even though he is called a priest, and he is a priest, it doesn't necessarily mean that he's a good man and a proper man of his religion. So I turn things upside down in this book. The man of science, the naturalist, turns out to be the humanist, while the priest is something else, and has his own fate handed him in a surprising way at the end. But it is a book that started really with the fox hunt. I read an anthropological study on Icelandic fox hunters, and in that study there were interviews with fox hunters, and they were describing the relationship to the fox. The fox in Iceland is the Arctic fox. It's different from the European fox, and every other fox in the world, even its fellows in Greenland and in the Arctic, because the Arctic fox in Iceland is the only Arctic fox that lives very close to humans, and has had to adapt to humans and adapt humans to it. So the stories that these fox hunters were telling about the fox hunt and the relationship with the fox, they were just astonishing. I mean, they really believe that the fox is telepathic, that it can get into your mind and mess up with your brain and make you do things. They really believe it can make itself invisible. And all of these stories are from fox hunters that are like, operating in the 60s and 70s. So it's not like, fox hunting in former ages. So those were new stories. So I started by writing the fox hunt, and I realized when I was writing the fox hunt that it was somehow an eternal story. And the only thing that told us that it was close to us in time was the gun. Mm-hmm. And at that time, I really didn't know if it was 1970 or if it was 1880, because once man goes into the wild, once man leaves the human habitat and goes into the wild, and you know this, of course, history also disappears. And it becomes the eternal hunt. And yeah, that's what I've got to say about archetypes. Obviously, when you have a hunt, when you have the hunter and the prey out in the wild, you are in a story that is ancient. At the same time, it's happening right now.
Thank you. და შემდეგ უკვე შემოდის ეს გოგონა დაუნის სინდრომიანი. ალბათ არსებობს დაუნის სინდრომიანი პერსონაჟები, მე არ მახსოვს ყოველ შემთხვევაში. ჩემთვის პირველი იყო და აქ არის რაღაცა აბსოლუტურად შემზარავი სიმართლე, ისტორიული სიმართლე, რომ როდესაც ესეთი ბავშვები იბადებოდნენ, მათ უბრალოდ ხოცავდნენ. ამათ ერქვათ ჩინური გარეგნობის ბავშვი, თვითონ ექიმი დაუნის მოსაზრებაც არის ამ წიგნში, ნახსენებია და მე არ ვიცი სხვაგან როგორ იყო, ეჭვი მაქვს რომ სხვაგანაც ასე იქნებოდა და რაღაცნაირად შემოდის ადამიანი, რომელიც აბსოლუტურად გარიყულია სულ ყველასგან რა. მე არ მინდა რომ რაღაცა დავასპოილერო ეს წიგნი, რომ რა ვისაც საკითხული არ აქვს ბედნიერება გელოდება წინ, მაგრამ შემოდის ეს პატარა ახალგაზრდა გოგო, რომელსაც თავის ფრთის ქვეშ იფარებს ეს მეცნიერი, რომელიც როგორც Sjón თქვა, ესეთი დაბეჭდილება დამჭა რომ მართლა შეცვლილია, რომ ღვთის ადამიანის ადგილას დგას ეს მეცნიერი და აი ამ პერსონაჟზე მინდა რომ ცოტა მოგვიყვეს Sjón-მა და როგორ დაინტერესდა საერთოდ ამ თემით.
So, once I had the fox and the priest and I realized what kind of a character the priest was, that he was very, let's say, just a very brutal character, and a character who likes to control his environment and other people in his environment. Then I realized that I cannot drop a character like that into the countryside in Iceland, into a small community, without giving him an adversary. Somebody has to come and challenge this guy. And when I was looking for this other person, I started looking at what the priest was and looking for what he was not. And what he was not was civilized. He was not a man who was interested in beauty, a man who was not interested in poetry, a man who was basically not interested in other people except in how he could exploit them. So I started looking for a character that could somehow match his absolute opposite. And when I was looking for this character, I had already realized the book was taking place in 19th century Iceland. So I was going through photographs from that period. Some of the photos that were taken by travelers who came to Iceland in the 19th century, in the 1800s. And as I was going through one of the books of photographs, I pulled the page, and on the next page there was this incredible picture of an Icelandic turf house. And the Icelandic turf houses are made of turf and a little bit of wood and some stone, but they basically look like hills in the landscape with doors and windows, you know. And there is a picture of one of these houses, but in front of the house, in front of the front door, there is a man who is dressed in like a three-piece suit. He's got like a nice scarf, and he's got a beautiful French mustache. And he doesn't look like he's just stepped out of a grassy hill in Iceland. He looks like he's just stepped out of a cafe in France, in Paris. And I took another look at him and I thought, you are my man. You're the man that comes to this remote valley, and you have the task of challenging the priest. Then, of course, I was left with the question, so what is it that brings their conflict about? And slowly I realized that it had to be about a human being. There had to be a third person in that story. First I thought, okay, so they grew up in the same valley. When they were young men, they were in love with the same woman. The priest got the woman. The naturalist moved away to Copenhagen, and when he came back, he discovered that the priest was still living with that woman and treating her very badly and all of, you know. And I thought, okay, come on, that story has been told so many times. It has to be something more for this man to absolutely go for the priest and challenge the order in the valley. And then I started looking at what people were the most vulnerable people in society in those days. And obviously it was people with different handicaps, you can say. And when I was researching the history of people with handicaps and physical and psychological and developmental challenges in the history of Iceland, I came up on this fact that children with Down syndrome had just like been put away. And I thought, if there is anyone who realizes the value of the human being that this little girl is, when he sees her, that is the naturalist. That is my man. And then it, of course, because we don't want to spoil anything, you realize that there is like a connection, a deep old connection between the priest and this little girl, and this young woman who grows up to be a young woman with Down syndrome. So it was really, I mean, what I think what I was working with is that it is the weakest in our societies who put our humanity to the test. And in this book one of the persons fails the test and the other one manages, you know. So C is the question. C is the question that is put to both of them as humans.
Thank you. ჩემი შემდეგი შეკითხვა არის ესეთი, ესეთ წიგნში შემთხვევით არავინ არ მოხვდებოდა, ხო, ყველას თავის ადგილი აქვს მიჩენილი და გაკრთება რეალური ისტორიული პირი, ესე იგი, მოხეტიალე მხატვარი და ფილოსოფოსი ჰელგასონი. და ხვდები, რომ რაღაცა შემთხვევით არ არის ეს კაცი აქ რა და მე მინდა რომ აი ამ ადამიანზე მეტი მოგვიყვეს, რას ნიშნავს სიონისტვის პირადად, რასთან არის დაკავშირებული ეს ადამიანი და საერთოდ ვინ არის და ისლანდიურ კულტურაში რა ადგილი აქვს.
Yes, this book is small, but it has many different strands, and even this one character who comes into the book for a few pages, really. Yeah, not many pages. But there was a painter, philosopher, a poet called Sölvi Helgason, who was living in Iceland in the 19th century, and he was a vagabond. He was a wanderer because his temper was difficult, and nobody wanted to house him for too long. So he went from farm to farm, telling stories, drawing pictures of people, philosophizing and all of that. And he has in Icelandic culture become sort of a benchmark for the artist, you know, that the artist is someone who cannot help but be what he or she is, and is just like walking humanity. And in this book, I thought, when I was writing the book, I thought, if there is anyone that, apart from our man, later on, if there is anyone who I would like, Appa, the young girl, the girl with the Down syndrome, if there's anyone I would like her to meet, it is Sölvi Helgason. And obviously when they meet, he does something amazing for her, you know. Yeah. So the book is structured, you know, it is a very simple story. It's an incredibly simple story. And because it's a simple story, I had to make it difficult for the reader. So it really works with expectation. It really works with stopping before giving the information, withholding information, you know. And it is like maybe we can make a metaphor here that it's like, you know, when I'm telling the story, all of a sudden I hold my breath. And when I start speaking again, I'm here. In the distance, you know, that the breath has made, takes us to another place in the story, you know. So it's always playing with, you know, the chronological narrative. Not only because it's a simple story that I needed to make complicated, but of course, whenever we can make a story complicated, let's do it. But it was also to let's say, work against the reader taking the story over and feeling that he or she knows how this is going. And then I hope actually that when you go through the story that you slowly realize you don't know where this story is going. Because there's also a mystery in this story, and there's also a crime in this story. Possible crime. There's a possible murder mystery in this story, you know. So there are many things, and I must say I really, it's one of the books that I've enjoyed most writing. And not only because I came to find these people and I could put up like these relationships, you know, that take us to this to the actual story, but also because it takes place in the 19th century. And the 19th century has been romanticized very much in Icelandic memory. It is the time of our national romantic poets, the poets who actually taught us how to love the country, love the nature of Iceland. Before the romantic poets, nature was just seen as a monster that wanted to get rid of us and that we were constantly fighting. And they said, nature is maybe monstrous, but it has an enormous beauty. And this is the beauty that we must accept. We must accept the monstrosity, but we are given this beauty as well. So in the story, in the writing of the story, I worked with the romantic, poetic mind as well. When you go into the nature and into the descriptions of nights and snow and spring after winter and all of that. So I try to bring, because the world is very hard. It's a very harsh reality they are living in. But it is the harsh reality that also gave us the romantic poets. So I wanted to give this book and this world some of that too. So there was so much going on when I wrote it, you know.
ესე იგი საერთოდ საქართველოში ნორდიკულ წერლობას ძალიან ბევრი მოყვარული და გულშემატკივარი ყავს რა და ჩემი აზრით ეს ორი წიგნიდან იწყება ეს სიყვარული და ერთ-ერთი ნამდვილად არის ორი წიგნი კი არა ორი ავტორი ერთ-ერთი ნამდვილად არის კნუთ ჰამსუნი რომელიც საბჭოთა კავშირის დროს ითარგმნა და ძალიან ბევრმა ადამიანმა შეიყვარა რა და გასაგებია რატომაც მე ესე ვხედავ და შეიძლება ბევრი ნორდიკულ ლიტერატურაში ბუნება ძალიან ბევრია ზოგადად რა დღეს თუ შეგვიძლია ვილაპარაკოთ აი ყველაფრის პირობებში როდესაც ეს ქვეყნები აღარ არიან თქვა ღარიბი ქვეყნები ხო ბუნება აღარც მტერი აღარც ისეთი ჰარმონია აღარ დღეს რა არის ნორდიკული ლიტერატურა თუ შეიძლება რომ ცალკე ისევ გამოვყოთ და რაზე დგას და რა ტენდენციებია და რა განასხვავებს სხვა ლიტერატურისგან
Well, I think you should answer that question because I'm in it. Yes, and it's very difficult to see clearly when you're in it. But I think maybe you're right with the relationship to nature, man with nature, in nature, against nature, or being defeated by nature. Those are themes that are very strong. But we are modern people. Why should we care about nature? And why should nature be such a big part of our writing and thinking today? Well, if you're from Iceland, there is a difference between how you relate to nature there, and I think, let's say, in the capitals of the other Nordic countries, where many of the great writers have come from, the Nordic writers. There is a proximity. There is like we have like there is a closeness to nature in Iceland which is inescapable. So even though you are like me from Reykjavik and you're born in Reykjavik, which is the capital, and you grow up there, I mean, you are always by nature. And you always feel that nature is there. And we are simply taught that nature is there to be respected and also feared. And that it is sort of the benchmark for the size of man, you can say. That is one thing, at least in Icelandic literature. But when it comes to, what can we say, like ideological foundation or something like that, philosophical foundation or something like that. I think the Nordic countries, the reason we talk about Nordic literature as if it is something whole, as if it is like something that these countries belong together in a Nordic literature. I think it is because we have a shared history. We have a long shared history that has been easy and uneasy over the centuries, but we have more or less gone through the same process when it comes to ideas in society, from the heathen times to the Christianity, through the Reformation, through the Enlightenment. I mean, we have been more or less step in step throughout all of these these big steps in how we think about the world. But again, if you are remote, then I think you have more closeness to what we can call folk beliefs and folkish ways of dealing with the world. And that is obviously one of the things that I try to bring into this book. We are in the world of the folk story, even though it's a modern story from 1883. It's a modern story happening then, but the world is infused with the ideas that come from folk beliefs. And the priest is the one who is most superstitious of all, you know. So what is Nordic literature? I mean, Nordic literature happens in small places and tells big stories.
Okay. აი რო ვახსენე რომ მე მგონი ორი წიგნიდან მოდის თქვენ სიყვარული, მეორე წიგნი იყო ისლანდიური საგები, ქართულად ნათარგმნი საბჭოთა დროს, რომელიც ლამის ყველა ოჯახში იყო რა და ზუსტად აქაც მივედით ისტორია სიონის შემოქმედებაში, იმიტომ რომ ის ძალიან ხშირად წერს რომანებს, რომელიც წარსულში ხდება, იქნება ეს მეცხრამეტე საუკუნე, იქნება ეს რეფორმაციის დრო, იქნება უფრო ადრინდელი პერიოდი, რატო რა არის მისთვის ანუ რითია საინტერესო და ამ ყველაფერში არის ძალიან ღრმა ცოდნა კიდე ისტორიისა რა. ეს ადამიანი ძალიან კარგად ერგვა და შეიძლება ვერ თქვენგანს ნანახიაქის ფილმი ჩრდილოელი, რომლის სცენარის ავტორია და ის კიდე ბერსერკებზე და ვიკინგებზე და ამლეტის, ანუ ჰამლეტის წინაპარის საგაა დატრიალებული. რა არის მისთვის ისტორია, ანუ რას ეძებს ის ისტორიაში?
Well, I think I am drawn to history because it's an interesting place where things are done differently. And one of the things that I enjoy in my writing is to go into the mindsets of people who, in a way, I come from. So it's an investigation into what made us into what we are today. Me as an individual, but also Icelandic society. And I mentioned that the 19th century was the age of the great Icelandic romantic national poets who paved the way for the national, the idea that Iceland should become an independent country from Denmark, and that our culture was of value, that our country was of value. The sagas, you know, the sagas were not seen as something like amazing by the early 19th century Icelanders. It's only when the romantic poets start telling us that these are works of world literature that we start like understanding that, okay, something happened in this country, some amazing culture was created in this country in the early days, and we can build on that. So we have all those ideas about the 19th century, but we also forget that it was a century of real cruelty towards the small and the weak in society. So I wanted to challenge this idea that this was only the age of like beauty and great ideas about what Iceland was and things like that. Because at the same time, the small people, the weak in our society were treated horribly. So I like to go to history to challenge what Icelandic people today think about themselves. But I also do it because I enjoy being in the minds of people who think differently than I do. And one of the things that it brings with it is different language. So, as I said, in this book, I'm working with the tone and the poetic phrases of the Romantic poets. In a novel that I wrote, the novel that I think I wrote after this one, which is called From the Mouth of the Whale in English, which takes place after the Reformation in Iceland. What I loved about it was that it gave me access and reason and excuse to work with 17th century vocabulary. And I could just write the craziest things, you know. And I could always say, it's the 17th century. That's how they thought then, you know. So don't blame me if it's crazy and strange, you know. I'm just writing it as it was. So it gives me opportunities to work with different mentalities and to do strange things. I like strange things.
Thank you. I am წიგში პასტორი, რომელიც რამდენჯერმე ვახსენეთ უკვე, რომელიც არის აბსოლუტურად ბოროტება, სიბრიყვე, უხეში ძალა და რაღაცნაირად ის და ნატურალისტი, რა თქმა უნდა, არ უყვართ ერთმანეთი, ისეთ კონფრონტაციაში არ შედიან. ახლა ჩვენი ფესტივალის თემასაც რო დაუბრუნდეთ და იმას, რაც ჩვენ თავს ხდება, როგორ უნდა ვიცხოვროთ, როდესაც ესეთი პასტორები არიან ჩვენი ბედის წარმმართველები, რაღაცნაირად მივედით იქამდე, რომ ახლა ნამდვილად შემიძლია დონალდ ტრამპი წარმოვიდგინო ამ პასტორის როლში და ძალიან გავს. რაღაცა სად ვიმყოფებით ახლა კაცობრიობა ზოგადად. იმიტომ რომ ამაზე დღეს სხვა შეხვედრებსაც უსმენდი და აბსოლუტურად აპოკალიფტური განწყობები იყო რა და არის და მესმის მშვენივრად. რა არის მწერლის როლი ამ შემთხვევაში? ალბათ ბევრჯერ დაისვა ამ ფესტივალზე ეს კითხვა და რიცი გაკეთება შეუძლია თითოეულ ჩვენთაგანს.
Well, when I was writing The Priest and thinking about the priest and bringing that character to life, let's say, I was really looking at this type in Icelandic society because there is always this tendency to sort of like the brute, like the rude guy, you know. I mean, rudeness has its own charm, you know, but only to a point, up to a point, you know. So I was really looking at what I think is a fault in Icelandic society, and that is when we like laugh too much with the brute, because then the brute uses the opportunity to do something that we were not expecting, something for himself, you know, and that in the end turns out to be cruel against other people. So what can we do? I mean, for me it's quite obvious what we can do. It is that we use our imagination. In the book, the naturalist gets his final revenge on the priest and the people of the valley who have humiliated the girl, you know, and refused the girl being a part of their community. And he could only do that because his imagination is alive. And why is his imagination alive? It is because he reads French poetry. So that's what writers, creative people can do. I mean, we can always remind everyone that we have imagination, we have creativity. We keep the possibilities open and alive, because dictatorship is always about narrowing down, closing things down, replacing truths, let's say, with lies, you know. I mean, it's always about making the world smaller, you know. Always about making the world smaller, closing doors, closing borders, you know, it's closing. They love this word, closing. Don't we just love this word, closing? Yeah? You know, I mean, it's about closing, making things smaller, narrower, while literature, creativity is about opening things up, making things flow together. So that's the only thing we can do. It's use the imagination. And as you say, the motto of this festival is pen against silence.
Yes. Pen against silence.
Against silence, yes. Yeah, yeah. And that's exactly what it is, you know. They want to create silence, which is about like making things smaller. They're always taking things away. They pretend to be giving things, but they're always taking things away and making things smaller. And I have actually written a poem which is about birds, a bird, a tiny bird, and the fact that this bird just has to sing. And what is this singing? The singing is breaking the silence, making itself heard. And by making itself heard, it creates a community because the others are doing it too. So at the end of the poem, I think it says what birds and poets have in common is that they break the silence.
Thank you. შეკითხვები ხო არა გაქვთ?
So, what I want to say, I haven't read yet your book about blue foxes, but what I heard from you, for me, it's a huge transformation and survival mentioning in your book through the allegories you used to it, if I am right. And actually, what I liked in your one question, where you have pointed about the people coming from the nature itself, should not be responsible only to take care of the nature, if I get it right. Because as you're raising your voice, you're rising for social changes and take care of through the allegories. And what I have been pointing now, we are in Georgia. Actually, myself, I am involved in ocean literacy, and I'm doing very small steps to bring ocean literacy and universe in my country as an ocean advocate for the European Union and also the mobile journalist. But however, I would like to say that we can feel when I teach some teenagers about the ocean, about the climate change, we're coming from the very beautiful mountain in Caucasus region. Yes, climate change can touch us, but it's not like it touches you, who is coming from the really related to ocean, very close Iceland and countries. This one to say that I have got no idea. This was it's a comment like you say that it's imagination, creativity, and break the barrier to create the wisdom, as we heard during this day. And when I thought, okay, you speak through this your books, but what could be the most powerful thing you could done as a either coming from the Icelandic literature and from the Icelands, I mean, to raise awareness most from the other countries who is less feel the dangers of this our nature, which is one anthropogenical factors is destroying itself.
Okay, thank you. What can I do? I always say, why ask the poet to do something else than write poetry? Okay, but there is poetry in this book, and there is a fable in this book. So allegories, fables help us match our reality with the reality of the fable. We start reading it together. And this is, of course, one of the wonders of the human mind, is that we have the ability of comparison. We have the capability to think in abstract terms, you know, and look for solutions in opposites and similarities. In this book, you have a hunter. You have a man who goes into the mountains feeling that he is the master of the universe. He feels that he's the master of everything, himself, the people in his valley, of the nature he's going into, of the fox he's going to kill. He feels he's in absolute power. But the moment he pulls the trigger on his gun, he's proven wrong. So what can I do? I can just tell stories, write poems that possibly help people think in a proactive way about the challenges that we are facing. In Iceland, it's the ocean. The ocean around the country is warming up. It's changing the migration of fish. The glaciers are melting. A lot of things are happening, which are not good things. possibly it's too late for us to do anything about the absolute change that is going to happen to the planet. But what we can do is that we can prepare for what is happening by, for example, keeping our humanity and reminding ourselves that we are going into this as one force. And to do that, we need to stay human and treat other people with humanity. Because obviously, we are going to see, and I say we, I'm not sure I'm going to be there, but it could happen sooner than later. We're going to see climate emergency migrants and refugees coming from places where it's uninhabitable anymore, you know, and things like that. And to be able to go into that situation, we have to have our humanity and our compassion for each other. So I think you have a lot of that in this book. Even though this book is written in 2003, before the discussion about climate change and what we call now climate emergency has happened. And that is, of course, what literature gives us, you know. I can look to the Nordic myths for inspiration to think about the climate emergency and maybe act in the best way possible in that situation.
Good evening, first of all. I admire your presentation and I think that you are really inspiring. My question is about the inspiration you had during writing this book. As you both already mentioned, a lot of poets and writers. I love the depth and the inspiration you give to other people with these characters. I love that you underline some psychotypes in this book. It's really thoughtful. Is there anybody who inspired you writing some of the passages of this book, or maybe some characters, any writer, any poet, for example? Because some biggest writers have their inspirations or like some light points in their life who like inspired them to write something or gave them like the fire. Is there anybody for you?
There's a long list of writers and
plenty of time to listen.
Long list of writers and visual artists and filmmakers who have inspired me, and I have never been afraid of naming those names, you know. So you can go looking for them in my work, you know. But apart from the Icelandic folk stories, which were a big influence on me as a child, really. There is the Icelandic writer Halldór Laxness, who received the Nobel Prize in 1955, and I think is possibly the last Icelandic writer to visit Georgia before I come now. Yeah. So he came here in the 50s, you know, after he got the Nobel Prize, and now I'm here. So unbroken thread there. He's a big inspiration for me, and he's a masterful writer, and he's always telling us stories about how we treat one another, and how he never says this is how you should treat one another, but he always takes us into a situation where we really have to think about it, and hopefully come out of it with the right ideas. But I mean, as a teenager, I became obsessed with surrealism, and I think what surrealism taught me, and I bring with me, for example, into a book like this, is an understanding of reality that is a total reality. So the reality of any one human being is layered. There are many layers in how we perceive reality, and there are many different stories going on at the same time in us as we navigate through what is reality, and you can see that in this book as well. The main characters, they have their own realities. There's one character in the book that I do not explore like that though. I enter the mind of the priest. I enter the mind of the naturalist. I enter the mind of the fox. The only character in the book that I do not, where I do not enter the mind, is Appa, is the young woman with Down syndrome. And I did it out of respect for people with Down syndrome, because I thought, I can imagine how it is to be a priest. I can imagine how it is to be a naturalist. I can even imagine how it is to be a fox, you know. I don't know, okay. I can try, you know, we are in the world of the folk story, so the fox can speak, you know, okay. But I thought I will not try to reconstruct the mind of a person with Down syndrome, because a person with a Down syndrome will not read this book, most likely will not read this book and come back and say, you got it wrong, you know. So, do you get what I mean? You know, it is not that I'm shying away at being wrong, but if you're wrong, it's good to be told that you were wrong, that you did the thing in the wrong way. It's like, the easiest example is all the male writers throughout history who have told stories of women and who have been proven very, very wrong, you know, in our contemporary times, you know. It's good for them. And now, of course, women write back at those stereotypes, you know. But a person with Down syndrome would possibly not be able, very unlikely be able to write back at me and say, now I'm going to write the novel that proves how wrong Sjón got it, you know. So I really treated her like out of absolute respect in that way. Yeah. But inspiration, you know, I mean, there's the Polish writer Bruno Schulz was a big inspiration for me as a young writer. All the surrealists, Mikhail Bulgakov, you know, The Master and Margarita. I read it when I was 18. And at the time, I had a great prejudice against novels because I was a surrealist poet. And as a surrealist poet, you were not supposed to write novels. It was like, no, you don't write novels. André Breton said, novels are just like catalogs from warehouses. It's just description of furniture and things like that, you know. But when I read Mikhail Bulgakov, I saw that the novel can be everything the writer chooses. It can be at the same time a love story, a magical tale about the devil. It can bring in Jesus Christ, you know. It can be funny. It can be incredibly sad. It can be a political satire. At the same time, it's poetic. So I thought, okay, if I try to write a novel one day, I want to put my toe by the heel of Bulgakov. You know, it's as simple as that. For me, that is the big book. And it's bigger than the Icelandic sagas or anything, you know, even though they're very good.
Yes. I will read my question because it's a little bit long and I don't want to miss anything. Well, I only noticed after I finished the text and read your interviews that the original had a musical sound because of the repeated refrains and the way the words fit together. Even through the Georgian translation is good, the musical sound of your text feels lost in Georgian, maybe the same way as in other languages, and I understand that a writer cannot be safe from this, but when you accept that half of your work, the language character you put into the text is lost in translation, how does that makes you feel? How sensitive are you about this? Is this painful for you or not?
I mean, everything that is translated both loses something and I think adds something. In this case, what is added to my novel is the Georgian language and ways of saying the same things that I am saying in the original in the Georgian language. And I am sure it has a unique beauty that I could not guess at, you know. So even though you suspect that maybe some of the musicality of the language is not there, I know that there is some musicality of the Georgian language that I don't know, or turn of phrase or rhythm that has come instead of it. And I don't think we should be worried about things getting lost in translation. It is the same thing as when we are reading books from other cultures or from the past of our own country or whatever, where we don't know anything, or at least we don't know everything about what is in it, but we still enjoy it. And because I mentioned Bulgakov, you know, I just know that in the scenes in the writer's house in Moscow, in that book, there are characters that were obvious, completely obvious to the readers of those times, you know, of his times, you know. They could like instantly recognize that, he's making fun of this person or that person, you know. So things are lost all the time when we read. And I think it's only when we grow up, when we start being worried about not getting it all. When we start reading, when we are kids, when we are reading, there are always words we don't understand. There are things we don't understand. But if the story is good, we finish it. And we gain so much else from the story. So I'm never worried about translations, because I know that the translation is always a reconstruction that is definitely bringing something new to the text. And I'm happy for everything new that happens to the text. Especially, this is a text from 2003. Isn't it amazing that it's being translated into Georgian today and renewed? And I just want to say thank you to my translator who's standing there by the door. Thank you. And thank you for having me here at the festival. Thank you, Archil,
Yes,
for he's the man behind it all, you know. When we met in India, you know, he's a prophet. He predicted all of this, you know. It was like,
yes, I
I
did.
can see you in Tbilisi.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
it's true.
And I saw the book translated. Yeah. But yes, thank you. And there was really very touching moments in this our discussion. Personally, for me, I think for all the audience. And finally, Shota will read a couple of your poems in Georgian again.
Thank you very much. It was Archil, and it was also Luca Grigolia, whose fault it is that you are here. Yes, as not only you, but a couple of great writers that we had: Pirko Saisio, Megan Nolan, Denis Utlu, and Aram Pachian. It's all his fault that they were here. So thank you, Luca, again. And we have some small inner joke of the festival about Nobel, and you mentioned it that I want to say. So first time, for the first festival, 10 years ago, we invited Svetlana Alexievich as our first guest. She didn't have Nobel back then, and 2 days before the coming, the festival started, she got very sick, so she, bailed on us and she didn't come. But we have translated her Chernobyl, especially for this event and so on. And next year she got Nobel. Then we invited Olga Tokarczuk. She agreed. She didn't come. And next year, after that festival, she got the Nobel. So I hope that, because you mentioned the Icelandic writer who was here and then got the Nobel next year, that you break this bad luck spell, and that after... but we did have a wonderful Icelandic poet, last year. Ostafani.
Okay, so she was there. Okay, it's good that there was one female writer
and
between
she was
the two guys.
Wonderful. She made like poetic songs.
Yeah,
and,
she's
she
amazing.
Was, on the stage, in the theater, and she was so. So we want to hear a little bit of your poetry in Icelandic.
Yes.
And then Shota, we have asked to translate, and Shota will read the translations in Georgian.
Do you want me to read all of them?
ეს თარგმანები შეასრულა ისლანდიურიდან მარიამ ბაშიროვამ. ის არ იმყოფება ამჯერად საქართველოში, ამიტომ მე მომიწევს ორიოდე ლექსის. რა ვიცი, 2 or 3. Yes, at first you.
Gárur til B og M. Svo sagt að þegar orð hefur verið sungið, þagni það aldrei. Það muni aðeins dvína þar til alheimurinn dregur að sér andan fyrir næsta mikla kveld. Og þá verði það ofið inn í fæðingaróp nýskapaðrar veraldar. Sundtak sem tekið fyrir opnu hafi glatar aldrei krafti sínum. Öldurnar sem hvítabjörn skapaði með sundi sínu út Kanal Grande árið 1405 húsbændur hans sigldu til Jerúsalem, þær eru þar enn. Ég fann þær skella á votum fótum mínum þar sem ég óð Aqua Alta háflóðið eitt föstudagskvöld í apríl árið 2019.
ლიცლიცი ბესა და ემისთვის. თქმულა ასე, რომ როცა სიტყვა ნამღერია უკვე, ის ვეღარასოდეს შეწყვეტს ჟღერას, უბრალოდ გააგრძელებს ქრობას, სანამ სამყარო არ დაიჭერს მის სუნთქვას შემდეგ აფეთქებამდე და მაშინ იგი აიბურდება ახლად შექმნილი სამყაროს მშობიარობის ყვირილში. ღია ზღვაში გაკეთებული ცურვის ბიძგი არასოდეს დაკარგავს საკუთარ ძალას. ტალღები, რომლების თეთრმა დათვმა შექმნა თავისი ცურვით კენელ გრანჩი 1405 წელს, როცა მისი ბატონები იერუსალიმში მიცურავდნენ, იქაა ჯერაც. მე ვიგრძენი, როგორ ეჯახებოდნენ ისინი ჩემს სველ ფეხებს, სანამ გადავდიოდი ალტა აქუაში 2019 წლის აპრილის 1 პარასკევ საღამოს.
I think we will just read one more. Yes? Yes, we read one more. You've been so patient. We'll read one more, one short poem to end with. It's a poem that is about poetry. Ars Poetica. Það vill henda í ljóðum að þegar þokunni léttir taki hún með sér fjallið.
Ars Poetica. ხდება ისე პოეზიაში, რომ როცა ნისლი იფანტება, თან მიაქვს მას თაც.